Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. Our core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I'll be your host. Today's guest is Dr. Maya Shetreat. Dr. Maya Shetreat, she is a medical doctor, a neurologist, herbalist, urban farmer, and author of The Dirt Cure, which has been translated into 10 languages. She's been featured in the New York Times, The Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, The Dr. Oz Show, and more. Dr. Maya is the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches earth-based programs for transformational healing, including professional training programs for psychedelic-assisted approaches. She works and studies with indigenous communities and healers from around the world, and is a lifelong student of ethnobotany, plant healing, and the sacredness of all of that. Well, Dr. Maya, it's such a pleasure and such an honor to have you on the show today. And this is it's a subject that's really fascinating to me. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So I'm curious, and I'm sure you've been asked this many times. I mean, here you're an MD, neurologist, being in the very traditional scientific world, and then all of a sudden, here you are talking about psychedelics and playing with dirt. So how did you transition?
I think it's less of a transition than it was really an embracing of all these different parts of me. I think a lot of us live in boxes that we're told we need to be in. So if you're a doctor, you're not allowed to think or talk about or be involved in X, Y, or Z. And if you're a mother, you're supposed to do these things. And, it becomes very constrictive and even kind of an imprisonment of to kind of limit our identities to just one thing. And I think it's part of what really causes a lot of suffering in the world for a lot of people, beyond some of the most fundamental things, like a lot of the existential angst and sadness that people have that's leading to lots of, mental health issues are really about this idea of feeling trapped in certain identities or like they can't really be authentically themselves. So for me, I was an only child, and the ways that I really kept myself occupied, I was an only child in the 70s, let me say that. So, it was not like being an only child nowadays. In those days, we didn't have cell phones, and nobody really knew where I was, and parents were not that interested in doing tons of helicopter parenting. So the way that I kept myself occupied was I read and read and read and read lots of books. And I would be out in nature, and there was a creek near my house, and I would make little potions, and I would create little mandalas, and I didn't know, what that was at the time, but it came very, very naturally to me. And I used to I would communicate with trees. I felt like I could tell when trees were sad, and, I was like this little empathic person. And then as I got older, I engaged in school and, kind of the regular world. And I loved science and, it really appealed to me. I loved writing. And so, I left a lot of those other things behind as things that, were about being a little kid. And eventually, through a lot of different events in my life, and some of which I wrote about in my book, The Dirt Cure, but my son got sick, and a lot of conventional approaches were really not helping him, my youngest son, when he was a year old. That took me into, how food is grown and how we don't get out into the natural world enough, and, talking about the dirt cure. And eventually, it took me into going to Ecuador and starting to learn with indigenous teachers and really learning about a whole new dimension of healing where, you know, healing is not just about our physiology, but it's about our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And that is really all about our relationships, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with those around us, and our relationship on the land that we stand on.
So it's almost like you were a little kind of a tree whisperer, you know, plant whisperer, you know, way before you became a scientist. So it's like it was already there. And then because, you know, and I agree, I was a child in the 70s, so it was the same. I mean, you had to just kind of keep her busy. You know, my mom's a single mom, so you just have to kind of figure out what to do on your own. And so then you have, like in your situation, you were able to connect with the energy of these plants, and you know, and it's like they're individuals. I mean, they have a unique presence and a unique energy to themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, and as an adult and pediatric neurologist, I spent a good amount of my career working with sensitive people, right? I mean, the people who present with neurological conditions, whether it's children who have autism or ADHD or migraines or seizures or even explosive behavior, right? I mean, a lot of the bread and butter of a pediatric neurologist, let alone an adult neurologist, right? And those kinds of conditions, these are people who are very sensitive people. They tend to be very empathic. We have a negative connotation around the idea of being sensitive, but I actually welcome sensitive people both into my practice and also into my training programs, because I actually think these are some of the most gifted people that we have. And our society doesn't really brand being sensitive as a good thing, but in fact, it's really more like we don't have a very accommodating society. And so we don't honor those things. But in fact, you know, from my standpoint, I was a sensitive child. And, you know, I've had people walk into my office, you know, like, for example, I had a young adult with autism who came with his parents. And I have a little altar space, whatever you would want to call it, but a very little special space with sacred stones on it and, you know, different kind of beautiful, special things. And he walked right over to it. And he wasn't a very verbal person, but he said, "We're safe here." And for me, that was just such a profound expression of really, you know, what these people, I call them, you know, the people who can hear a bee sneeze 3 miles away. You know, these people who really live in a world that can feel very violating of those things. So, you know, absolutely. I call my son a little shaman because he was really my muse. You know, his health issues and the things that came up for him were very much what guided me professionally in my life and in my purpose. And I don't think it's because of him, but he made it clear what my path was to be so that I could fulfill things that were important for me to do, you know, for my own purpose and my own meaning in life. And so, yeah, I think this is a really important space to hold for people who are more empathic, who are sensitive, and who are affected by the world that we live in that's not very friendly to that.
And so we have that group, you know, the people that are empathic, and they, you know, obviously all the stimuli, you know, the harsh stimulation that are coming from the modern world, not the soft ones that exist, more subtle, you know, in nature, that are more complex but more subtle. You know, so we have that group that is very, I mean, this world we're living in is very intrusive to them. But I think there's also that group of people that are having to kind of shut down their complexity of communication with their environment, you know, because it is harsh. So they become less of who they are. Kind of like you were talking about that, it's to be stuck in a box. You're having then to eliminate a portion of your personality in order to be able to operate within that box, and how important it is to then expand who you are and then to connect to more of the world around you, more, with and be in nature. I mean, like I one of the guys that I interviewed was Richard Lowe. He's known for his book, Last Child in the Woods, saving our children from nature deficit disorder. Where we're needing to be in that space in order to be able to awaken the complexity of signals and communication that exist in nature versus all the harsh and simplistic signals that exist just in modern society.
Well, absolutely. And I think Richard Lowe's work has been really, really important. And we're talking about it in terms of children. And obviously, I feel very passionately about children's health and well-being. But I think it's important for everybody, no matter what their age. And, for people who think nature just sounds like it sounds nice, or I think for most people, it seems pretty obvious, like, yeah, of course, like we need nature. But, just from the standpoint of thinking about, first of all, we used to live in homes that had dirt floors, right? And would spend most of our days outdoors. If you were a human being, right, then that's what you did. You were in kind of nature all the time. Now we've done this kind of like attempt to separate, even though there's of course no separating, because, our bodies are as much aware of being separate as they are being in, right? So we're always in relationship. It's just what is the quality of that relationship. But for people who think, yeah, that's nice, but I would just say, you go for a walk in the woods, there are all kinds of neurological systems that are activated simply by walking forward. Okay, so you're taking a walk, and that doesn't have to be in the woods or in nature. But then kind of doing your lateral eye movements are actually a way that we process trauma. And that activates our parasympathetic nervous system. So forward movement is actually a way that develops problem-solving areas of our brain. And doing the lateral eye movements like you would do if you're in nature, right, where you're seeing the bird over there, you're looking at the tree over there, the wind is blowing something over there, so you're constantly moving your eyes. You're actually activating certain parts of your brain that, are just similar to, let's say, something like EMDR, where you're really like processing and moving difficult experiences through your system, right, in a certain way, metabolizing those things. Then you're earthing, right? You're grounding as you're going through the woods. You're breathing in microbes, and now we know that a lot of these microbes in nature actually have what we call psychobiotic potential, where they actually alter our mood. So if you're depressed, they make you less depressed. If you're anxious, they make you less anxious. Cognitively, they help enhance your brain function, and there's a lot of studies on this. So you have that going on. There are these smells in the woods that are very primal. We call them geosmin, the smell of like earth, right, and the smell of the forest, that actually activate your amygdala in certain ways for the better, okay, right? So those are also these primal centers in your brain. And I could go on, right? There's all this data about forest bathing, that shows your cortisol levels drop, and so those are stress hormones, they come down. Anti-cancer proteins increase, so that you're actually less likely to get cancer simply because you are walking out in nature and being peaceful in nature. So when we say, nature deficit disorder, whether you're a child or an adult, we're actually talking about full body, physical, mental, cognitive, emotional, and of course, spiritual health, just simply by being out in nature, which is like the greatest win-win we could possibly ever imagine. So it's very scientific and it's very medical. And I think for me, my real passion has been to bring together, the ecological, the spiritual, the emotional, and create a language, a lexicon around that and bridge it to the science, which is exciting, right? I mean, they're both such exciting languages that describe mystery, the mystery of the body and the mystery of nature and the mystery of the cosmos. And so all of those things kind of get married together in this kind of work, which is why I find it so interesting and gratifying.
And it's kind of sad that this has to be a new frontier, here, I mean, that nature has to be a new frontier, where we are now exploring something that existed forever. I mean, that's where we are from nature. And now we're exploring it so that we can see the scientific reason for what we naturally, should do. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Maya Shetreat. She is the author of the book, The Dirt Cure. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Maya Shetreat. She is the author of The Dirt Cure, and she also is the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches earth-based programs for transformational healing, including professional training programs for psychedelic-assisted approaches. So in your mind, I mean, the best healing, I mean, here you're looking, I mean, I'm a naturopathic doctor, and we're using the herbs and things to help people, and they come in with different issues. But it's almost like the cheapest thing that anyone can do then is just take a walk in the forest every day, and just experience that.
Well, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And of course, that's not the only thing that we need to do. As of course, right, that we're exposed to a lot of things, and we, need to eat well and these other things. But if we want to have foundational health and well-being, the one practice that you can absolutely do and prioritize is exactly that, to get outside and take a beautiful walk in nature, even if it's just for 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be 3 hours or 5 hours. But I will say, and this is interesting, it was an interesting study that was done actually looking at vision in children. So I think I was raised to believe that, my bad eyesight was related to my father's bad eyesight, and that it was a genetic thing. But there were studies that were done because there are actually parts of the world, like in Korea, where eyesight had gotten so bad in young men that 97% of them were having vision issues. And it was like confusing because obviously you can't have a genetic epidemic, right? So the question was why? And what they found really by accident was that it had to do with being exposed to full spectrum light and like sunlight. And, basically they were in classrooms all day and they were indoors and they weren't getting enough natural light exposure. So what actually they found in this study was that the ideal amount of time, do you want to guess the ideal amount of hours for kids to be outdoors to have good vision?
I'm curious, but I would assume that even like an hour a day, would have a tremendous impact. What was the ultimate? What was the?
Yeah, so what they said was 3 hours a day would be ideal. So of course, any amount of time is better than no amount of time. But what they found was actually they said 3 hours a day, and they actually found it by accident because of sports, and they did all these kinds of they had to look at all these confounding factors, and once they eliminated them, they realized it was getting natural light, and they recommended 3 full hours. So yeah, absolutely, being out in nature, being outdoors, even moving, even if you have a quick lunch in the middle of the day, just taking it outside and making sure you're getting a little view of the trees and getting a little bit of fresh air is something that could make all the difference.
Because I know with children, obviously we're dealing with ADD, ADHD, autism, learning disability. I mean, that is really I would say, an epidemic, throughout the world, and especially here in the United States we're living in. And so, and then we know that the eye movements, the eye movements is such a, like you're saying, it's such a crucial aspect to stimulate the different areas in the brain. So here we have, the children, they're sitting at home, they're on their phone, their tablets, TV, and eye movements is very limited because obviously screen is only so big, which means that they never stimulate the different areas of your brain that is on the sides, and also which means that you are then less able to, your brain is not developing, your neurological development is just becomes very deficient and very, very poor. And then so you have that aspect, and then you're talking about the richness of all the different little spores and little bacteria and things that exist in nature. And obviously living in a home and just staying in a home, you're not exposed to that. So then that impacts your immune system. You're not learning, your immune system is not learning all the, get the information from all these different pathogens around you. So sterility, it then creates that deficiency, that simplistic kind of immune system that's not able to handle a lot. And then we're exposed to a kind of weird virus or weird, fungus or whatever it is. And then our immune system is not intelligent enough to deal with it. And so to me, it seems like, what we are losing with our modern society is this complexity, and that is what naturally exists in nature, and also obviously in food that is grown more natural instead of using pesticides and things, or and kind of having a farming technique where the nutrients are more complex rather than just this amount of protein, this amount of carbohydrates, and this is all you go by. So what I'm seeing from your work is kind of bringing people back to that kind of complex experience. And I think that the psychedelics that you are, or the plant medicine is part of that whole process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from the standpoint of the immune system, to touch on that for a moment, I think most people believe that the immune system is this army that's ready to attack when there's an enemy. But in fact, the immune system is a incredible information processing system that is very social, very sociable, right? So it likes to meet and greet lots and lots of different kinds of compounds and foods and organisms and so on, and learn them, right? And the more that it does that, the more robust and kind of sophisticated it becomes, right? That complexity. And the less that it does that, the more, as you say, it can be challenged by something unexpected that might even be just milk, right? Or gluten, or, and this is actually part of how not only do we end up with a lot of chronic illnesses, but also even things like cancer, which is in a form of a chronic illness, because we make those cells normally, right? Some, hopefully not very many, and a healthy immune system will be like, oh, not you, oh, not you, take care of that, take care of that. So, absolutely, it's true that we're now living with a lot of chronic illnesses because of this lifestyle that we've adopted. And I don't really want to make it sound like this has just happened by accident. I think you and I both know it's been a very directed process for, hundreds of years, actually, that we've been in this kind of being moved in this direction. Even the public education system, which was mostly spearheaded by, the Rockefellers, basically they said, we want workers. We want to train workers, not thinkers, right? Like the whole idea was, let's get people from farm life and, being kind of their own boss, and so they can come and work for us and be in our factories and so on. So yes, we've created this, we've been shepherded, I would say, into this system that makes us chronically ill. And, the question is, what do we do about it? And, one of the ways is looking at things like psychedelic medicines. And what interested me about them was actually the fact that these have been used probably, we think, since really the beginning of time, certainly the beginning of civilization. There is evidence that a lot of these medicines actually instigated a lot of world religions, for example, or aspects of world religions. Like one of the things that anthropologists and scholars are writing about is that the oracle at Delphi was actually sitting in this cave where smoke would kind of emit from this crevice. And, there is an idea, right? And many papers written about the idea that the oracle was actually breathing in some kind of altering plant that allowed her to have the visions. And that, for example, the reason that Hindus may have adopted this idea, this practice that cows are sacred, is because what grows in the cow patties actually, a lot of psychedelic mushrooms, and they were considered to be sacred and ceremonial and a way that people could shed a lot of societal or communal, I should say, suffering, right? So a lot of these medicines were actually used as a way to heal the community by medicine people. And so I found it very interesting to start to explore what role they could play now. So there was, of course, in the 1950s, LSD was studied extensively and used extensively by psychologists and psychotherapists, in therapy for depression, for OCD, where actually it was very effective. And the studies were so promising, and then they got completely shut down. And, we could talk about the reasons that happened, but when you make something illegal, and it was sort of the beginning of like the war on drugs, which had had a lot of social ramifications. It was around the time of the Vietnam War, and there were a lot of war protests. It was at a time when a lot of things were kind of being shut down, and society was kind of becoming very, very conservative. And obviously these medicines are very mind-opening, right? So there was a lot of stigmatization of them. And so then, a lot of research started to begin again in the last 5 to 10 years, so that almost every academic institution, every major academic institution in the world has started to have studies being done on psychedelics, or even centers opening on psychedelic medicines. And the outcomes of these studies have been very impressive for what we would call the diseases of civilization, right? Like addiction, depression, anxiety. And I mean, these are things which are life-threatening for many people and that don't respond to really any therapies that we have. And many of these were treatment resistant when these studies were done. And what they found was, in many of the cases, just one dose with support before, during, and after could completely reverse major depression that had lasted for years, and they tried literally everything, right? Or an eating disorder that could be, completely, disruptive to not just one person's life, but their whole family. Or addiction, right? And I'm talking about addiction not just to things like cigarettes and alcohol, but those, of course, are incredibly difficult to quit. And not only did those studies look at cigarettes, alcohol, and even stronger drugs like opioids, but they actually found that even a year, 18 months later, the people were still not using. Many of the people, most of the people were still not using. So it was very exciting to me, and I wanted to look into what the neuroscience showed and what we know so far about the physiology. And it's been, a really interesting journey.
Let's take a quick break because this is such a fascinating subject. Listening to Health Made Radio, I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Maya Shetreat. She is the author of The Dirt Cure, and you can find more information about her and all the programs that she offers. It's just a wealth of information on her website. That's drmaya.com. That's drmaya.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Maya Shetreat, and we're talking about healing with dirt and the complexity of nature, and also the powerful impact of psychedelics and how they can be used. So in regards to psychedelics, there seems to be such a stigma about it, meaning that people are afraid of it. And here you're talking about all the powerful impact it has. And actually, it's freeing people from being addicted to, alcohol or tobacco, or having to be on some antidepressants or anti-anxiety type of medication for the rest of their life, that is ruining their health. And here we have a solution that is really kind of mind-opening, and also, like we're talking about, supporting neural complexity. These psychedelics have that ability. So why is there such a stigma about it, and why are people so afraid?
Well, I think it's largely because we were made to be afraid. We were told to be afraid, and that was a narrative that was put forth. I mean, one of the high-level people in the Nixon administration basically, as much as admitted that, outlawing cannabis and outlawing psychedelics was actually a strategy to shut down and be able to arrest the hippies, who were actually anti-war, right? They were very much trying to change society and actually influencing society, and that was unwelcome. So, and whether people agree with that or not, or politically or whatever, the point is that, were these medicines really something that needed to be outlawed? Probably not. However, and this is a big however, the way that they were being used and engaged with might have not been very responsible. It was kind of a wild time. I mean, I wasn't there for it, but I think there's a way to engage with anything that can be harmful. And I think it is certainly possible, although these are not addictive, and part of the reason for that, just from a neuroscience standpoint, is that a lot of the, substances that are addictive or can be addictive activate the dopaminergic systems. And dopamine is that kind of pleasure reward center loop, okay? Whereas psychedelics activate the serotonergic systems, which is more actually about mood. And it's not that these are totally unrelated. There is some dopaminergic stimulation. Nothing is just one or just the other. But the major way that psychedelics operate do not activate systems of addiction in our brain and our nervous system. But can people just be reckless? Of course they can be. Can people use these in the wrong way? Of course. Are these for everybody? I don't think so. And should they be engaged with in either a sacred way or, a more therapeutic way? I think so. There are definitely people who are very much in favor of decriminalize, make these available to anybody, including recreationally. And we may get to that point. I mean, some places are getting to that point already. But I think the key is that for the most part, these are very, very safe. And when I say these, I would say more specifically, a lot of the actual studies that have been done, and these studies have been done by world governments. I mean, I'm not just talking about like a little study of 100 people. We're talking about they looked at 67,000 people and who used psilocybin, let's say, right? The magic mushrooms, as they're called by some. And what they found is that actually people didn't do dangerous things at all. They actually were less likely to commit crimes. They were less likely to commit spousal abuse, more likely to have more empathy, were less likely to commit suicide or violent acts. And they were considered to be quite safe, actually. In these studies, when they looked at a lot of different behaviors, what they found was these actually cultivate leadership and good communal behavior compared to not taking them. So whether this is, I don't think that these are things that automatically make you a better person. There are some people, I think, who would like to believe that, but I don't think that's automatically the case. But they do activate more empathy. They do activate new ways of thinking about things, more open-mindedness, which is something we could certainly use right now, and they increase brain plasticity. So areas of the brain that were previously not communicating with one another do communicate with one another, and that actually can make us more resilient and even smarter and more creative.
And so from what I'm hearing, I mean, obviously, if you're dealing with anxiety, depression, depression, addiction, then these are very useful tools in that area. But even for a person that just wants to be able to kind of expand their ability to, find solutions and be more connected to community, just that kind of a person can benefit from it. So you don't really need to have then just a disease, so to say, in order to be able to use this kind of medicine. You, just a normal person would greatly benefit from it as well.
It could be, absolutely. I mean, for some people, so if someone has a history of psychosis or a family history of psychosis, then at this moment in time, from the data that we have right now, it's considered contraindicated. But for really almost any other person, whether they have a condition, and some other conditions that I didn't mention are like PTSD, or trauma-related things, people with sexual trauma, for example. And even they're looking now in studies at dementia and actually looking at microdoses of psilocybin, which we can talk about more if you want, along with a medicinal mushroom, lion's mane, and niacin, which is one of the B vitamins. And actually, preliminary studies show it's reversing the progression of dementia, which is very exciting to imagine that neurodegenerative, and maybe other kinds of degenerative disorders might actually improve by engaging with these medicines. And then, of course, as you say, there are people in, Silicon Valley and other places where they, are very excited about microdosing or doing macrodosing, as we're discussing, because it does help with that creativity or kind of thinking outside the box and, engaging with this medicine right now.
Yeah, and yes, because dementia, Alzheimer's, and also post-stroke and all of those areas, traumatic brain injuries, like you're saying, this helps then to kind of create that neural complexity and repair then of kind of damaged neurons, and where there's inflammation in the brain, and can really help with that, and then combining, and that's really exciting, combining then that with niacin, vitamin B3, and it's not niacinamide, but niacin, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because so you have the non-flesh version, called niacinamide, which is a form of vitamin B3, but it's actually niacin and then the mushroom lion's mane. And microdosing, then, so what does that look like? And how would one proceed doing microdosing? And do they need to be under guidance of somebody, or is this something that people can easily do on their own?
Well, so what is microdosing? It's usually done with psilocybin mushrooms, or LSD, actually, is another commonly used treatment, where the dose is what we would call sub-psychedelic. So with a large dose, this is where the word trip comes from, that people actually kind of, you wouldn't be able to do your daily life necessarily, right? You're going to be maybe having visions or feeling very differently. And, you have to focus on that inner world more so, right? And whatever visions or different messages might come through are considered to be actually a beneficial part of the experience from a medicinal standpoint, right, and a therapeutic standpoint. Microdosing, you don't have that aspect, right? So you can do, theoretically, your daily life. You can drive your car, you can take care of your kids, you can do whatever you need to do, and you're taking this sub-psychedelic dose. So it's creating some of the shifts from a nervous system standpoint, and maybe even from an emotional standpoint, where, people will describe feeling less socially anxious, more connected, more like taking good care of themselves is a very common description. People feel less like they want to engage with things that are harmful, like, maybe smoking or alcohol or, other things that might normally get in the way for them or be a coping mechanism. So there are a lot of really, pleasant descriptions that people of their experiences of microdosing, but no real psychedelic experience unless they accidentally take too much, which of course is a possibility depending on, what they're getting. So to that point, you ask, well, is it easy? Can people do it easily? Should they do it on their own? I personally think, first of all, I would just say psychedelics are still illegal in lots of places, certainly in the U.S., but they're being decriminalized in various places, and it's happening very quickly. So right now in Oakland, California, in Denver, Colorado, in Washington, D.C., in the state of Oregon, we know they're decriminalized. And what that means is not that they're legal, but that they're at the absolute lowest priority for law enforcement, meaning they're not going to pursue anything unless someone has a massive amount. They're, doing some, dealing kind of thing. So small amounts are just not going to be prosecuted. That's basically the point. And that's really to create the openings for this to become something that people can use. Certainly there are academic studies where people can engage in that. So I do just want to put forth the idea that this is not available to everyone in the U.S. right now, but there are definitely initiatives, and wherever, people are listening, you can find out by looking up decriminalized nature or decriminalized psychedelics. You can see if your area has an initiative, and you can become involved in that if you think it's important, to have access to these medicines. But that said, because although it's quite safe, because people don't always know their own thresholds and sourcing can be a question, I personally think it's useful to have guidance in this process. I don't just think for most people, I know there are people who already engage with these medicines, legal or not, and have experience, and that's, its own thing. But for people who are looking at it as something they want to use therapeutically or medically, or even to just improve creatively, it's nice to have it's nice to be guided. It's nice to be helped through the experience, even for microdosing. And that's something that, for people who are able to access it, I've offered to clients to guide them through the experience. And there are other people who do that as well. And I think it really enhances the experience, because it is an experience that can be very opening and create real shifts out of stuckness for people, whether they have a real condition or a diagnosis of some kind, or even if they don't, because we all, as human beings, have periods in our lives or aspects of our lives that can feel stuck, that can feel difficult, that can challenge us in big ways that don't have to have a name stamped on them or, be put into a diagnosis box, but still can be, hard to move through. And these medicines can really help people do that, even the microdosing.
And I can just think back to the cacao ceremony that I did with you and a bunch of other friends of both of us, and how nice it is to have somebody that is it's kind of like you're learning how to develop a relationship with something that has a personality in itself, and to have somebody that is experienced in that and guiding you through that and kind of setting the stage, setting the energy, kind of the safe space energy, like you were talking about the gentleman, the son that was dealing with autism, and saying that this is a safe space. It seems to me that when you're embarking on such a what I would call sacred medicine, just because it is so powerful and it's something that has been involved for people to expand in who they are, and both philosophically, spiritually, and also as a community. It's nice to have somebody to guide you through that process, so that you come at it at the highest, best potential, and you get the most out of it. It's just like if you want to play tennis or do anything, you want to have somebody that guides you through it. I mean, you can play, but you'd rather play well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is about creating a relationship with the medicine itself, and that's something we didn't talk very much about. But indigenous communities feel that these plants, these medicines, these mushrooms, that they have, that they are teachers, and that they have, kind of a spirit, almost, you would say, that you're communicating with, and that you are cultivating a relationship with this wise elder, in a sense. But I think even more importantly than that, it's actually about cultivating a conversation and communication with parts of yourself. And sometimes that's actually can feel scarier than even the relationship and the conversation with, a medicine or the communal piece, because we don't always, we compartmentalize lots of things. And, what these medicines are very good at doing is helping people to access parts of themselves that maybe they don't access usually. And there's a whole, neuroscience behind why that happens. But, the takeaway is we need to talk to those parts of ourselves, even that even that are old parts of ourselves, or things we don't like, or things we might have felt ashamed of in the past, et cetera. They're all steering the ship, right? And the more we kind of avoid parts of ourselves, the more it doesn't make them go away. It just makes us feel unhappy and fragmented. So that's, I think, the big part of having a guide, microdosing, where you're not having any psychedelic experiences, so that you can kind of, feel held as you negotiate parts of yourself that maybe you haven't been in communication with.
Yeah, and it is an unknown territory that you're embarking on, so it's just nice to have somebody that knows that territory and can guide you through whatever it is, even though it is safe. There's still kind of that unknown, and anytime there's an unknown, then people get nervous.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Dr. Maya, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm so grateful for that you're spearheading this type of medicine and also spearheading our ability or our need to get back to nature and to touch dirt, to play in dirt, to be, feel the wind, look at the birds, connect with plants, connect with trees, and how important that is for our emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. So thank you so much, Dr. Maya, for sharing that with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. That is it for today. You're listening to Health Made Radio. Remember, check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it.